You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and I have a guest here with me today to chat about a topic that I think a lot of listeners have interest in and questions about. So I'm going to turn it over to them so they can introduce themselves and let you know where you can find them online.
Hey y'all, my name is Siri Vincent Pluoff. I am an author, and educator and shop owner and a lot of things. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you can find me online for now, I'll say. On Instagram at siri.vincent.pluoff. And I'm also on Threads. And you can also find me on TikTok very occasionally at Siri V Pluoff. But I'm not super active on there.
Fair. Me either.
Oh yeah, and if you really love this episode, I do have a Patreon and a newsletter. So you can find the Patreon at Siri Vincent Pluoff. Like just search me on Patreon. And my newsletter you can find on my website, sirivincentpluoff.com.
Yeah, those are among my favorite ways to connect as well. Social media is just not my favorite and doesn't work well for me, but I feel like you get such a good connection on
Yeah, I
like
feel like
newsletters and Patreon.
yeah, for sure. I feel like especially with like, I don't know, like the algorithmic directions and also really frustrating like AI components of social media. Like, I just don't know how much I'm going to share of substance on there, but I
Yeah,
do post announcements on there.
it's a rough world out there. So, for the listeners who are not yet familiar with the work, let's chat first about your book, and then we will get into sort of like what led you to write it. So, for brand new listeners, let's talk about Queering the Runes. What is it? What can people expect?
Yeah, so Queering the Runes is a sorry, blah. I'm we're we're recording this the day after the US election and I'm kind of like a little hazy right now, but I'm good. I'm fine. So
You
I'm sorry if you have to like edit a lot of weird pauses and shit out. I'm so sorry.
You know
Um
what? Normally I would, but I feel like maybe I should leave that in so listeners can understand because I think everybody like in this community is kind of like feeling the same way this day. So
yeah, especially if you're like interested in a book called Queering the Runes. I feel like yeah, you're maybe feeling some feelings right now. Like
yeah.
I am. But yeah, so the book is essentially a queer look at the Elder Futhark particularly. I am a Nordic folk magician, a Nordic witch, and I kind of wrote this book as like an introduction to the runes, to people who, maybe are concerned about is this resource that I'm looking into anti-racist or, anti-white supremacist? Is the resource that I'm looking at going to accept me and my sexual and gender identities? All of those things. And because it's a perspective that I feel like is definitely needed in the Nordic community. We have so much potential for queer like amazing work. And so I wanted to write a book that, was a love letter to that and that lifted all of those potentialities up.
I love that. And I do think that that is something that's like misunderstood from like Nordic traditions and like people getting the wrong idea about the symbols. But then when you look at like the Nordic pantheon, like it's full of queerness. So Like,
Right. Yeah, like what are we doing?
like somewhere some like signals got crossed. Okay, because that's not what like when you look at like the Nordic gods and goddesses, like that's not how it's working up there. So
Yeah, and that's even in, like a like later material, right? Like that's like a lot of the material that we have, the source material is from, the medieval period, which is, much later than people who are looking at, say ancient Greek mythology. So even into the period of Christianization and stuff, like a lot of that queerness remains. So I think that it just leaves a lot of like really amazing and good questions.
so how did the runes, I know you cover this in the first chapter of your book, but for listeners, how did the runes and the Nordic tradition present itself to you? Where did you even get started?
Yeah, so I have pretty strong roots in Nordic community. So my mom's side of the family is very strongly Norwegian, very proudly Norwegian. So I was kind of around like that sort of like immigrant, community. Um, Not immigrant because like, my grandmother was born here, but like immigrant as in like still connected to their, like roots, I guess. Um, so I really grew up with that, and consequently, when I started getting into witchcraft and stuff like that, I thought that Nordic stuff was boring. Um, which is something I haven't really said anywhere else, but I ended up getting initiated into a Wiccan coven when I was a teenager, and some people in the coven used runes. I actually have a set of runes that I made when I was, under their tutelage. And then I ended up, we kind of went our separate ways. I moved away to college. And in the introduction, I talk about this, but essentially, I, as a solitary person, was looking to connect with a spirit or a goddess specifically. And so I did this big ritual to try to, like call in a goddess, and Odin showed up, like this, figure with a hat pulled down over one eye and a big beard and kind of like this wry little smile. And I was like, what? This can't be real. Um, and then I just kind of became like there was a murder of crows that was kind of like following me around, or I had to go to work and there were like, crows everywhere and ravens everywhere. Uh Things about the Norse gods and Norse stuff would get brought up in conversations where that wouldn't be normal necessarily. So I kind of like gave into it that like, okay, this is like for real. Um and then a few years later, after I had started my professional tarot reading business, um I was in a lot of conversations at the time in the, kind of witchy blogosphere about cultural appropriation. And I wanted to avoid cultural appropriation as I was, diving deeper into this kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess, now is a great time to learn about the runes. Um, and so I really kind of dove in there. And then after a couple of years, I started working with my spiritual mentor, Kari Touring, who is a um, local heathen and author, and does, really incredible work around the vulva stav. Um, and that's really how it kind of has spiraled out, like not spiraled out as in like a bad thing, but like that's like how like my journey toward Nordic magic and stuff has gone.
I love that. And I love the way you presented that story in the book as well. Because yeah, you wouldn't think it would be Odin. That would be like the first any god or goddess to be presented to you. I feel like that's kind of a unique one.
Yeah, yeah, especially because I think at the time I was reading Starhawk's The Spiral Dance. And so I was like really interested in goddess works specifically. But Odin was the deity that I really needed. And so yeah, the ritual worked. What can I say?
And you mentioned crows, and can I just say that the cover of your book is so cute. I love it. It's just like
I
so
love they
pretty, and
did
it's like little eyeball like stared at me. I'm like, I love this so much.
Weiser did good by me with this cover. This cover is so beautiful. I'm obsessed with it.
It is. The colors are great. Like everything about it, I'm like, yep, this is the winner. Not, I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but this one is accurate.
Right. Yeah, it's so good. I love it so much.
So would you say that the information contained in here, since you did, talk about cultural appropriation and getting started in this, would you say that the information contained in your book would be for anyone of any background and for beginners?
Yes. So I wrote this specifically to be a good access point, a good entry point. And one thing that I strive for with my written work is I strive to make it accessible on one level to beginners, but I also want to showcase new ideas for people who have maybe been doing this for a while. Um, whether you've never picked up a rune set before in your life, this book is gonna help you out if you are a professional rune reader or, a very accomplished rune reader, rune worker. I hope that this book kind of opens up new ideas and interpretations for you. And new kind of like ways of thinking about and working with the runes. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty clear, like I believe that runes and Nordic magic has to be an open practice. Because if not, very often the people who are like, oh, this isn't an open practice are like literal Nazis, right? So like I feel like this has to be an open practice. And I've had, students of pretty much every background. That was very a sweeping generalization. I've had students of very diverse backgrounds be interested in rune work, whether or not they had Nordic ancestors, whether or not they had any cultural ties to Nordic magic. Of course, by the time they were done working with me, they did have some cultural ties to Nordic stuff. But yeah, for the most part, I think that the I want to always be presenting Nordic magic, Nordic runes, these systems of wisdom as being open and accepting of everyone. And there is an ancestral veneration aspect of it. I think that that's pretty clear in the book as well. However, that does not mean that you have to have a certain kind of ancestors to benefit from this work.
I appreciate that. And I have heard that from every single witch person that I know who generally practices, has any sort of interest in Norse paganism, heathenry, anywhere along those lines. Every single one of them has been like, welcome, we want more people. Come join me. Come join our community. We love having new people. I want to teach you everything. It's like so welcoming.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that because there are definitely like, I have an entire chapter in the book about it's titled like a radical heathens modern rune history or whatever. Um and so I kind of talk about like how the rifts and how runes were appropriated by white supremacists. And I talk about that history in there. And so I know that a lot of people, there are still groups out there that are, like white supremacist groups that hide behind heathenry or use runes, mostly as a way of entering spaces where they normally wouldn't because they can claim that they're a religious organization. Um, which is so infuriating, right? But Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that everybody that you've come across who is connected to this work is very opening, sorry, is very open. I think that it's just so clear, right? Like it's just so clear when someone's not, like what the kind of
Oh,
connotations of it are.
absolutely. I mean, even witches who I don't have any associations with Norse paganism will understand that just like from the point of view of like the pentagram or something getting all these like negative raps and like we know that it doesn't mean that, but like somebody else like took it and used it in the wrong way and like, you know, people run with that. And that has happened with so many Nordic symbols and the runes especially.
Yes. Yeah, it's very bad. It's not good at all.
Which is why it's great to have a resource like yours out there that specifically says on the front cover, querying the runes. Like you know what you're getting into with this, and you know that
Yes.
it's going to be an open, welcoming book that is for everyone.
Yes, and I wanted it to be obvious like from the beginning. Um,
I like that. I think that people are going to see that on the shelves and be like, okay, yes, I get it. And I feel seen and heard, and I love it.
right, yeah. It's also really funny. So I that wasn't the title that I proposed when I, proposed my or submitted my proposal for querying the runes to my publishers, mainly because my co-author for my first book, Lessons from the Empress, Cassandra Snow, wrote Querying the Tarot and Querying Your Craft. And I was kind of like, well, like querying the blank is very much like a Cassandra thing. I don't want to, like take from their work weirdly. But my editor actually proposed Queering the Runes as the title, and I was like, okay, cool. Let me just check in with Cassandra real quick, make sure they're okay with that. But I love it. So yeah, and of course they were totally fine with it. Like they're a gem. But I just didn't want to be like, hi, I'm stepping on your toes.
No, that's great that, you know, the asked and got the support. It's lovely to see the witch community supporting each other.
Yeah, yeah. And Cassandra and I are very close, so it was kind of like keeping it in the family.
Well, one of the things, like in addition to all of the information that you provide, because you do give like the whole history and explaining the runes, which is helpful for me because I'm not new to it and I still don't understand like most of the time. And I think part of that is the building upon each other. So once you like I get like one rune, but then like I start combining them and then things start to go haywire for me. So I appreciate that you specifically talk about this in the book. Could you explain what a bind rune is and how that comes up?
Oh yeah, so a bind rune is a form of runic magic. If you are familiar with sigil work, then this will feel very comfortable to you. So basically, a bind rune is like if you have an outcome or something in mind, and you want to use runic magic for it, you can make a completely new rune utilizing multiple runes that would like connect with your goal or your intention. So in that way, it's very much like a sigil, except the symbols that you are adding into your sigil are runes, and have that kind of um uh they kind of operate on a similar level, except it's just runes, not, like any kind of symbol. And you can repeat runes as much as you want. Like in the bind rune, it's really like a moment of creative expression for you. And then you can charge the bind rune and use it in, everyday magic, or, charge it and send it off to do your bidding and that kind of thing. Um, yeah.
I think that's a fun you practice and useful for a lot of people because they are like familiar with sigil work, so that kind of makes sense. So I appreciate that you put that in as one of the examples. And like you have other ones of using runes like in spell work. And I think for like tangible learners, that's like the best way to like put it into practice. Because a lot of people just think of the runes as like a method of divination, and that has come up on this podcast before where we talk about that and casting runes and reading it as divination, but maybe not as much as like for using it within your spells and rituals.
Yeah, and I, of course, for me, I think that the runes are very special because they are specifically intended to be used for both divination and spell work. Of course, you can use anything that you use for divination and spell work. You can use tarot cards, you can use, all of this other stuff, but runes specifically, like in the literature, in the tradition, have a magical purpose, and they have a magical history. Yeah, like, I mean, they're very active partners, I think, which is wonderful. That chapter, actually, I had to, like, so I have one single chapter about using the runes in magic. Um, I had to really physically restrain myself from putting way more in there because there are just so many different ways that you can work with it. And I have so many ideas about magic and how magic operates and all of that stuff. And eventually my editor was just like, Siri, you can have more than one book. Like, you
I
can
was
have
just gonna
more
say
than
that what
one.
you're saying is there's gonna be a part two.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, like, I'm still actually developing some of my own, like, using runes for magic um stuff. So, I don't know how long it will be before there is a rune magic book from me specifically, but it is a definite possibility. Let's just put it that way.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And speaking of that, for do you have or believe in any superstitions about getting a set of runes? Because we sort of talked about that with tarot before on the podcast and kind of dispelled that like somebody has to gift you your first tarot set. Like, no, you can go buy it if you want. Is there anything about runes that like you have to make them yourself, your first one, or can you go buy a set, or what do you believe there?
Oh, I totally believe that you can go and you can buy a set. It's very easy to make your own set of runes. Um, but if don't have, for example, a wood burner or, the tools necessary, or like the paint or whatever, or if you just, are gifted a set of runes that, is obviously not made by you, like, it's totally fine to start with those. I feel like however they come to you, they come to you. And I happened to make my first set of runes, but that was only because I was in a coven at the time, and the high priest of the coven was a rune reader. And so he was just like, hey, like, you need some runes. So we're gonna make some runes together today. Um, so that was kind of like a unique way that I can buy my first rune set, and I do still have them. But yeah, you definitely don't have to make your own at first. Speaking of making your own runes, though, there are some like ways of magically charging them. Um, while you're making them. I think that one thing that I have done when I've made rune sets is chant or sing the name of the rune while I'm like burning the rune into the wood, to sort of awaken it and just have that further energetic connection with it. Another thing that is very common is tracing over the runes with blood. Um, and your blood, not anybody else's blood. um and there are ways of doing that in a sanitary way. Like, you can get what are they called, like lances?
Hmm.
Yeah, like, you can get like a medical device essentially that will like prick your finger, um and you can trace over the runes with blood on your finger. So that is another way of, historically, like, charging them and connecting with them personally. Like, if you're making the rune set for yourself, that is another way that you can interact with them.
I like that. Your own blood. I'm gonna be like,
Yes. You're keying them to you, so therefore use your blood. Do not use anyone else's blood.
Oh, that is great. I wanted to get a set and start maybe like connecting with them one on one. Something that comes up early in your book that I really love, and then I want to ask you what mine would be, is the runes spelling out your name with
Oh
runes.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would mine be? STEPH. What's like the closest then?
STEPH. It would be solo, the rune for the sun or success. Tyr, Tiwaz, the rune for justice. E would be like Ahwaz, which is the rune for like the horse and partnership and kind of like working together. Um, and then probably, honestly, I'm going to say that like the PH sound I would make into the F rune, which is Fehu, which is a rune of like abundance and cattle and basically having your needs met.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was looking at them. I was like, what would I be? I was like trying to figure it out. I was like, I mean, that S obviously for your name was already in there, and I was like, okay, I got that. But then I was like, but I feel like that's such like a great way to start the process of working with them is just connecting to your own name.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that Kari Touring, my teacher locally does a lot. Like she'll do that with kids at different like Viking reenactment festivals and stuff like that. It's really fun. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's a very particular magic that comes from the fact that you could write with these runes like and you could also read. So like sometimes even in rune readings, I've had them spell out words before. Like if I've thrown them on the cloth, like, hey dummy, like this is what we're talking about.
Oh,
This is
wow.
this is it. And it's very blunt. I actually don't read runes as bluntly as a lot of other people do. For me, they're a very poetic medium in which I'm kind of like looking deep into the well of weird and following different threads and stuff like that. And so that can, when I'm doing a reading, that can be very poetic in nature. But I also do have a very like, if a client were to come to me and they have very strong, like, yes, no questions, or very strong, like, I need to strategize this specific thing, I usually go for tarot or I'm learning regular playing card divination. And I would do that because, uh, yeah, with the runes, I feel like it's harder to ask specific questions, at least in my relationship with them. They're like, no, you wanted to learn about your love life? No, your career is on fire. Let's talk about that.
I think that might be where like some of my struggle is with like certain methods of divination, like tea leaf reading and runes, is that I'm not a very outside of the box thinker. I'm very linear and I like yes or no answers and I like a path and I like rules. So tarot just comes easier to me, but it is a goal of mine to sort of work through that and make like a creative breakthrough there because I do feel like it stifles my creativity when I get like so rule focused. And I'm like, no, this is what it means and there's no deviating. And it just doesn't help me in my divination when I act like that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the runes would be a really good fit for you, actually, just because they, like, a lot of people do report that they read pretty bluntly. Um, but they also, like, there are so many multiple layers on which you can divine. Right, so there's like the literal, like if you cast them on a cloth and they spell something out, like pay attention to that, right? That's like one thing. There's the kind of accepted meetings that we have as like modern rune readers. And then there is also um like the spell work level of things. So if you're looking for like an action or a kind of magic that you can do, um that uh the runes are really good for kind of like providing that as well.
Yeah, I feel like that one might be a good like 2025 resolution for me
Yes.
to like work on, because then like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like change this like whole aspect of myself or like my witchcraft practice and like overhaul everything, and then I just overwhelm myself. So maybe just like let's start with a couple of runes and like go from there.
Yeah.
And start
Yeah.
start learning the system and start incorporating them. So I feel like that might be a fun little adventure for me. And then something I wanted to just mention, because I know that you mentioned this in the book as well, but you kind of hinted at it in a couple of things that you said, is this aspect of community that surrounds like heathenry and Norse paganism, that it seems like you know, you had the coven and you have teachers. It seems like a very community based kind of practice. And I am much more solitary. So is there still space for me?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's still space for you. I think that so I have like kind of a complicated history with community. I am very much a community-minded person. I really like the teaching aspect of my work, and will continue to do that. I actually am going to be having like a Queering the Runes online course is coming out in January, so people can
Oh,
look forward to that. But yeah, you can do this in a solitary fashion. I think that heathenry has very specific, like community-based values. Um, and what's another way of putting it? It's like community-based values. It's um we have, different bloats or ceremonies, different holidays, but a lot of people I know who maybe don't have a good, like, inclusive community near them, um, are solitary practitioners, and that's totally fine. I also know that so I have been teaching recently with the Fellowship for Fire and Ice, which is an inclusive heathen group. And you can join their classes from anywhere, and it's not necessarily like you're joining their kindred, which is the heathen sort of word for coven. um so you don't have to like feel like you're joining a kindred to get the knowledge that these experts are sharing. So there are a lot of ways of being involved in heathenry without being necessarily in community. I also think that truly, like, as far as runes go, like you can have a very personal relationship with them that is not predicated upon your participation in um, any kind of kindred. And also, a lot of times when I talk about community in the book, I'm not necessarily talking about community in terms of like who shares your spiritual beliefs, but like just community, right? I'm talking about your neighbors. I'm talking about like your family, your community of friends. So in the book where I'm talking about community, it's not only like including the heathens in that. It's everyone.
and I really enjoy that because Yule is my favorite holiday. And
Hmm.
I love the season. And then my friends are mostly in like the Catholic realm, but like very loosely I use that term for them. They wouldn't say that they're very strict in their religion by any means. But like every December we start the talks and they're like, okay, so fill me in. I know that, my stockings have nothing to do with baby Jesus. So tell me why stockings exist. Tell me why there's 8 reindeer. I'm like, oh, yay, I get to share all of my stories and knowledge.
Yes,
Like
yeah,
my
it's kind
favorite
of
version of
fun.
community is like, yes, let me tell you all of your Christmas traditions that come from Norse paganism.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. Like, I don't know. I think that there's there's really something to be said for cross-cultural friendships, and I do think that to an extent, if you are like steeped in witchery but you have Christian or Catholic friends, like that is a cross-cultural relationship. Like you share other aspects of culture, right? But like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's where a lot of my friends come from. It went to all girls Catholic school for 7 years. And I
Oh
think
yeah, okay.
I think there was a lot of trauma bonding that went on there. So
Yeah.
we are bridged by quite a few things. And even though like some of them are still like religious, that's like not one of them. And they're totally open to me like not being part of that. So like the I like bring them into my witchy community. I'm like, here, we can all celebrate this holiday.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's really good. My partner went through, I think like uh all K through 12 was Catholic school. So, yeah.
That's rough. That's rough.
Yeah. Especially as like a little queer kid.
Oh, sorry.
Like, yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Uh, well, Siri, thank you so much for being here today and chatting about your book and just having a fun conversation on what has been kind of a tough day and a
Yeah.
tough
Thank you
morning.
for bearing with me as I'm a little bit more scatterbrained or
No, you
uh
know what? I think that listeners are going to appreciate that. And they're really going to appreciate having your book out there as this resource. I think it's going to speak to a lot of people, especially at this time of year.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And listeners, I am going to have everything linked. So if you would like to check out the social media, the Patreon, and everything that we mentioned, if you, of course, want to get your hands on the book, everything will be linked in the show notes as always and over at witchwednesdays.com. And that is everything that I have for you today. And I will see you all next week.
All right.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. And you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.